I had imagined this as an interactive morning, an interactive hour. So I'm very eager to have all of you, any of you who have a question, to please feel free to ask the question. It can deal with the pieces in the exhibit would be ideal, but it doesn't have to be that. If it has anything to do with my work, how I work, or how these pieces were made, the wood itself. I had a question earlier before. I kind of wish the mics were on about sources of wood. The conservation of wood is a topic these days. So I use a lot of exotic woods. I'm happy to go into that as it relates to the pieces here. But I hope that I will not be speaking every minute. I really would like to hear from you what you would like to know, rather than me just giving a monologue. So I worked with Craig. Craig and I talk every Wednesday for a couple hours for a couple years. That's how Craig learned. That's most of how Craig learned about my life and my work. And he lives on one coast. I live on the coast of West Virginia. And Wednesday morning's our time. And actually, some of the time we're not even talking about woodwork, right?
That's true.
But the opportunity to present a cross-section of my entire career has been a challenging and very satisfying effort. I have pretty good records from 1997 on, and we used receipt books and business documentation to find some of the people who own the pieces in this exhibition. Sometimes I'm in touch with these people yearly or even more frequently than that. Longtime collectors, people who have supported me throughout my career. But a few of these pieces were owned by people who I haven't heard from in 30 years. They maybe bought one or two pieces and then I didn't see them anymore. So the effort to mount this show, to find work that we wanted to be in the show, required effort through the web, through the mail, through phone calls, to reestablish contacts with with old customers. And in some cases, that was spectacularly successful and fun to renew an old friendship from a show. I made my efforts to sell my work over the whole 40 years has been at retail shows and ACC shows, the Smithsonian Craft Show, the Philadelphia Museum of Art show. I would sit in my booth, a little bit of which is right here. These pedestals and my booth sign are actually what I used at shows. And I had 4 more of those. So I would present my work in these. And then the rest of the show is, in my mind or my dreams, it's kind of like a gigantic booth, an enormous show, and I'm in my chair, and you have all come. I didn't have chairs in my booth for you guys, but we would all talk about what was on.
Now they get to buy their work back that they.
No. I think that's, I don't know that that's going to happen, but interesting thought.
Just saying.
Anyhow, the detective work required to reestablish contact was a joy, and a reward is the show. So please, if you have anything that you, yes, you were.
So I'm wondering, a lot of your work that obviously looks like a spoon vessel.
Yeah.
Are those things you just dreamed up, or are many of them like pieces from what certain cultures used, or some combination of both?
Both, actually. There are exceptions. Is that coming from me, that those really loud squawks? Like, both, because more pieces here than any other way of getting to the finished piece are reactions to the wood. So it's almost a sickness. I'm really so full of love for the variety of woods in the world. I've worked with between 100 and 150 woods over my career, and that's just a teeny fraction of 1%. There are over 55,000 types of wood in the world, and most are not accessible in any way. There are many, many small trees, too small to use for anything. But I have tried to track down as many of the hard, dense, beautifully colored woods as I can find, either for sale or directly from the source where they grow. You know, I use algerita, the piece right behind you, for example, is a common desert shrub in Arizona. It's everywhere. And if it grows in the desert, it's a bush. If it grows near a stream, it becomes a small tree. And the wood is very beautiful, and it's hardly ever used by woodworkers because it doesn't grow big enough. But for a spoon, you don't need much wood, right? So there are several examples of that. Everybody's familiar with dogwood. They're blooming right now in the East. And dogwood's a very appealing, beautiful wood to work. Nobody would ever make a piece of furniture out of dogwood, just not large enough pieces. But for spoon carving, it's fine. Tell me, there was some other part to your question there.
It's not a sickness, it's a superpower.
Well,
So I just wanted to correct that.
It involves my question a little bit. So I want to know if certain spoons were like based.
Oh, I see, culturally,
like a certain
from the
culture.
cultural origin. So not initially. Initially, I was learning myself. When I began, I was more not wanting to continue being a social worker, which is what I was, than it was that I was so aggressively eager to learn about wood or to make spoons. I was just like, I don't have to do that anymore, you know. So at the very beginning, I was finding my own way with this new interest in woodworking, and I wasn't very aware of spoons from other cultures. And as I got books out of the library, people would tell me about books that they had seen. This is pre-internet. I learned a little bit gradually over time about other cultures and their use of spoons. So I was pretty interested in the northwest coast of North America. Many tribes that are coastal British Columbia and the northwest part of the US make spectacular spoons. And I read books about them. We went to museums and saw them. Part of the background there is that the Native Americans and the First Nations people there, food was, the acquisition of enough food to live was easy there, coastal. It wasn't as much of a struggle as it was in the desert or some other areas, plus trees were everywhere. So they had time and raw materials for that. And that was, at least that's what they told me at the Smithsonian.
Wow. Well, so it must be true.
So as I got more interested in that, in my booth at the Smithsonian show, several years running, I would tell employees or would ask employees when I met them, can I see more than what you put out? You only put out like a few pieces of your vast collection. They have so much more than what you see. And finally, I asked the right person. I was really lucky. So a person came into my booth who was changing the whole system of record keeping for the Smithsonian from analog to digital, from paper files like a library in the old days to all digital. And she said, I can give you a printout of every spoon, ladle, and dipper in the whole Smithsonian. And then you can go out to Suitland, Maryland, put on these little white gloves, and we'll take you around and you can photograph them and handle them. So I did that for 4.5 days, seeing spoons from all over the world, taking pictures, holding them. And it was not all the same time. It was one day, and then 6 months later, one day. It added up to 4.5 days. Just so inspiring for the work. So there are pieces, there's a piece in the show that's in the Mobile Museum of Art that's very much inspired by African spoons that I saw during that time, looking at spoons from other countries at the Smithsonian storage area.
Were they all wooden or were they made out of other?
Well, that's the printout was narrowed to wooden. That'd been a much bigger printout if it was all spoons. And
But I think part of the answer to the question is that Norm has all these influences coming from all over, from nature, from seashells, from galaxies, from, design of a 50s automobile to anything. And they're mixed in there and come out in unique ways. So they're not taking some other culture's traditional spoon form and using it. A good example is this fabulous piece loaned by Jeff Bernstein and Judy Chernoff. This is Makassar ebony. Looks very tribal, very African, but it's a unique construction. Two-handled spoons are really rare in the world. They're really rare in Africa, and it's turned on
partially turned.
partially turned on both the handles. So those are turned on a lathe. And the lathe was not, there isn't a tradition of lathe use in equatorial or sub-Saharan Africa. So they wouldn't have that kind of coving in that. That's not African. So this combines some elements of kind of a African and tribal look with what originally was a Western European turning beads and coves and things like that into a two-handled spoon that works so great with a black wood like this. And then there's just nothing like that out there. But those elements are mixed in there, all these spoons, all these ideas, turning what turners do. And it comes out as a unique construction. Of these 5 featured pieces, some represent galaxies and inspirations. Some are responses purely to the piece of wood in his hands and what could I do with it to shape it. Others, I think, are a mixture of these images and curves and shapes. And you can't argue with me because I'm your biographer.
But I have argued with you.
Here's a question.
Sam.
Wanted to actually piggyback on the question about like how does the spoon and the piece of wood one of the finest piece of art that's in our house. Piece of farm, whatever you create, you can't see what you got. It's a fine, it is a word that there's everything about it. It's just like it's so pristine. Such like chaotic. So how does the spoon form?
Well, first I should say that the man asking the question, faster. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, what I'm about to say will include the question. Just give me a second to get to it. So the person asking the question is somebody that I've known since he was born. And he recently, or fairly recently, was married the question was, why did I make the spoon? How did I make the spoon? How did I connect the wood that I used to make a gift for his wedding? And where Sam grew up, there's a pretty dilapidated old barn right behind his house where he grew up. And I thought it might be appropriate to find a barn board from the building behind his house, from the old barn, and to make a wedding spoon or a wedding gift for he and his wife from where he grew up. He doesn't live there now, he lives in Nashville, but it would connect him forever to where he grew up. And the board was, frankly, it was just an oak board. It was not, in some cases here in this exhibition, there's a big story or a feature of the wood, like right in front of you, that piece. The underneath of the bowl of that piece is something I had never seen before. And I had to find a way to make a piece, spoonish piece, that saved that because it was so unusual. But for your piece, it was more you, your history, and the source of the piece of wood. It wasn't so much the grain. Once I had the piece of wood, actually, I remember that even more clearly. It was an 8-quarter piece, so it had to be, I didn't need that thickness especially, so I did play with that a little bit so that I could get the grain to show up the way it does in the piece, in a way that appealed to me, and I thought that would appeal to you, and also on the 2 hearts that are on each side of that effectively are the handle of the piece. But to broaden on your question, many of the pieces I have in the show, there's some often small part of the wood, of how it is in my rack of wood or my bins of wood that I have in my shop. There's something about it that draws my attention to it. And I don't know already, really. I don't know at the very beginning if it's enough. I don't know if it's going to sustain the whole finished piece, but it's enough to get my attention to get it out of the box or off the shelf and to see, well, it won me over. It got me to pick it. So let's go from there a little bit. Let's see. So I'll start cutting, usually on the bandsaw, wood away from that feature to see if it continues to interest me. And I keep going as long as it has me. You know, I'm working for it at that point. I'm listening to what it offers. And if that back and forth keeps going, then sort of in that point comes the start of the shape of the piece. Big, small, big bowl, little handle, big bowl, big handle. All those types of things grow out of that first appeal of the best area of the wood. And I build on that. And that can take an hour or it can take months, where I'll leave a piece that I thought I had a good idea about on my bench, but then I get stalled for a little while and I can't find the next step. I've gone so far, but not enough to make a finished piece. I almost never made myself, you know, how you were told as a kid, you have to clean your plate when you're eating, you know, you must clean your plate. Well, I tried not to have that approach to spoons just because I've started it. If it's not going to be any good, it's not going to be really great. If I can't sustain that energy, that excitement, then I stop, because there are plenty of pieces that will sustain that excitement through the whole piece. So then you're there, you're feeling it the whole time. And that's the best of doing this work, is to feel that you're on the track of something really good, really, you know, there are less interesting times in making a piece. Hand sanding is often like that toward the end of the piece, where I'm like begging, you know, please, please, I got to get past this. But most of it is very exciting and stimulating. And it's like, yeah, you know, I want to feel that way. as long as I feel that way, then I can keep going on it. So,
So along with that, can you talk about like when the naming of the spoon comes into play?
yeah, I really love titles for pieces. I think it enhances a piece to have a good title. But if in the course of making, I haven't thought of a title, and then when it's finished, Diana and I will often put pieces for an exhibition on our dining table and just sort of look at them for a few days or, before they're packed up for a show. And some pieces already have names because the names come as they come. I don't make them have a name. And there are a few that I'm kind of disappointed I didn't come up with a name, a good title. But I certainly prefer there to be a title. So I also, Diane has input into titles. My wife has input into titles. Andrew was with us for a long time. He influenced titles sometimes. I've looked at, on using the internet, other cultures, words where the English word doesn't seem like a really good title, but I said, let's look up what the other languages for spoon, other languages for whatever the spoon looks like, the shape of the spoon. I did a sculpture that was sort of like a horse head, and we looked up what horse was in other languages and used that word rather than horse. Somehow the word horse didn't fit the piece, but the other culture's word kind of seemed right for it. So the pursuit of the title, I think there are working artists who have to have a title, or maybe it's from the galleries or customers or something want a title, but I don't make everything have a title. Not every piece has a title. I wish, but it doesn't work out that way. So.
I have a question from Derek.
Oh, yeah.
At what point did you realize that you graduated from a spoon maker to a sculptural artist?
Thanks, Derek.
Yesterday, I think.
I know this man. Well, it's funny. Acceptance of something like that is, for me anyhow, it was really slow coming, because I would have people in my booth tell me that I was making art or that I was an artist before I fully felt that way. And I had an interesting, it's actually in the book, but I'll tell you it again briefly, that there was an event in in Little Rock, Arkansas, to do with Robin and John Horn. And I flew down there, and John Jordan and Robin together picked me up at the airport. I don't think it was the CWA event.
Oh.
I think it was another time. So they picked me up, and we were riding in John's van back to their place. And I was just talking about something, answering a question, and I referred to myself as a craftsperson. And Robin stopped the conversation and said, "Don't say that, you're an artist." And I just have great respect for Robin. And she's always had my attention. And she just said, "You're an artist." And I'm not saying that it turned me in a minute, but I remember that very vividly. And I remember the impact that had on me. And I think it was a turning point for me, thinking both of myself and my work differently. And this almost sounds like a contradiction of what I just said, but I don't think about that a lot when I'm working, that kind of thing. I don't think about, is this art or is this craft? I'm just making my pieces. You know, I make wooden spoons or spoon-like pieces or spoon-inspired pieces. That's just where I've landed. It's where I'm comfortable. It's where I seem to have imagination. It's just my little space in the art world. And I don't, that's not ever on my mind when I'm working, really. I'm just thinking, is this satisfying to me? Is this a form that's satisfying? Does this express what the wood offers? Does this tell a story about me? Does this tell a story about some other subject that I'm interested in conveying an idea through the shape of my piece? Many different angles like that. But I'm not thinking, are people going to think this is art, or people going to think this is craft anymore? There was a period of time, there's a piece in the show called True North. There's a piece in the show called True North. And that is
Pointing north.
it's a reference to a period of time where I was really unsure about that. And I wasn't, the battle between, is this art or is this craft, has tortured me through the whole thing. I don't enjoy that debate very much. And I like it very much when somebody else responds to a piece with the clarity that Robin responded to me with. And I'm elated that they feel that way. And then at that moment, I feel fine. But sometimes in my shop, I'm like, that just doesn't matter, and the debate doesn't matter. It's how that person feels when they look at my work or when they come in my booth. And if they react with an artistic appreciation response, then for them and me at that moment, I'm an artist. That, you know, I don't need the giant sign on the wall that says I'm an artist, you know.
I just want to point out that the piece True North is right there, and it is pointing north, and it's not pointing to magnetic north, it's pointing to true north. So it just shows you the care that Nava in the center for it would do on setting up the display. So good job with that one. So I want to interject a little comment about learning about Norm's work process. Is when I got started woodworking, I met Norm and I said, you're my mentor. I walked into his booth at ACC Baltimore and I said, you're my spoon carving mentor. And Norm said, that's great. Who are you? But he was very receptive and supportive. But I would have thought as a beginning woodworker that what you do is you start with a piece of wood and you have this spoon in mind, and the spoon is the material, and you know this sculptural mantra that you remove everything that's not what you want, and there's the spoon inside. But Norm is much more sensitive to the wood. He takes the approach of Krenov, the great cabinet maker, that you read and react to the wood as you're working with it. So you start off with a preliminary idea, which you have to get started, but you adapt to what the wood gives you and what you have to remove and what you can take and what the opportunities are as you move along. I think this piece, Apex right here, probably had a lot of that in it, because you have a preliminary idea, but you're not sure what you're going to find as you begin to remove more material and carve into a piece. Not every piece does that, but there's almost every piece you have to read and react. Some pieces you impose more of a form, but it's not an engineering approach that I know what I'm going to build, and so I'm going to build it. It's much more organic. That's why Norm's pieces stand out in the field of art and wood, I think, as being more naturally expressive. They sit differently because he's read the wood and he's reacted to wood. Often, would you tell what you do with wood? You leave wood all over your shop for months, even years sometimes.
Yeah, well, when I was answering your question about going to the stack of wood or a bin full of wood, I have a lot of wood. I mean, most of what I own at some point really interested me, or I wouldn't own it. But my understanding of what really special wood is changed over 30, 40 years. So now I have standards that are like ridiculous. And when I started, I didn't realize what was out there, you know. So I can't put as much wood around me tight as I would like. It's like an animal gathering stuff for a nest or something. You know, I want inspiration near me. It can't be actually where I'm working, but it can be within easy sight of me, maybe a little more than an arm's length away. And most of my career had high potential pieces sitting really close and at my feet even, waiting for them to get loud enough in my head that I would stop the other one and had to do that one because it was making its presence.
Do you have a favorite, Norm? Favorite wood to work?
I have a favorite sort of in time frames, in periods of time. Amboina has been a favorite for a period of time. Algerita has been a favorite for a period of time. This piece is Australian snakewood, unrelated to the snakewood everybody else has seen. A lot of people, a lot of woodworkers are familiar with the snakewood that grows in Suriname. This comes from the desert in Australia, and it's called snakewood because the tree and the limbs are so contorted and snake-like. It's the shape of the tree that gave it its name. And it's been a favorite for quite a while. It's just astonishing in color, grain, suitability for my work. It's a very dense hardwood with a lot of contrast between the heartwood and sapwood. I use that contrast around the show. You'll see on many, many pieces. I love heartwood, sapwood contrast. I don't know if that, I mean, I have many favorites, and it changes. Sometimes I buy one wood or see one wood. Like another favorite is logwood, which is a wood that was almost wiped out in South America for red dye. It stains your skin if you work with it in weather where you would sweat it all. Your sweat is pink at the end of the day from having that wood, any of it in the air. I mean, you don't have to get a lot of sawdust on you. Just what's in the air, it turns you pink. But it's a very luscious, beautiful, wonderful wood. And I got that by accident sometime in an order of another type. The man sent me the wrong one. And that's how you stumble into something wonderful sometimes.
Where do you get most of your woods from? How do you get them?
So I did shows all my life. Where do I get my woods? So at every show, there would be other woodworkers, many of them outstanding woodworkers using beautiful woods, and they have scraps. They, like a turner would bandsaw out the blank to put it on the lathe, and there'd be pieces in each corner, sometimes a bigger piece, but there'd be pieces left from that. So I would approach other woodworkers at shows. They all joke and tease me about it because I asked everybody. I asked all people. I've been to musical instrument makers. I've been to other casket makers. I've been to anybody who works with wood has scraps, and everybody has scraps that they'll never use because, a casket maker uses big boards, right? Even a guitar has certain size pieces that they use. But once in a while, they have a really beautiful scrap that's not suitable for their work, and it's really pretty. So they put it on a special shelf. I don't know what they think they're going to do with it. Actually, they don't realize they're saving it for me. So I have gotten scraps from almost any woodworker you can think of. Many, many people have given me wood that they couldn't use. I've mostly been given it. A few times I've had to pay for it, which is absolutely fine. I'm absolutely willing to do that. Another common thing is I would trade a spoon or a letter opener or something for some of their scrap. But many, I don't know, a lot of the spoons here were made from other people's scrap. Yeah. And
You send smaller scraps to other people that work on a smaller scale. You give some examples.
even to the absolute absurd, our son can tell you a little bit about this, but yeah, Janelle Jacobson, for example, some of you would know Janelle. Janelle was a ceramic artist, then she was a Netsky carver, a small wood sculpture artist, and now she's back to ceramics. But I furnished a lot of the wood she used for her small carvings. Pieces too small for my work, I sent to her. There's a piece in the book that shows her fantastic carving work, a piece of boxwood that I sent her. And for a period of time, there was a ceramic teacher at our local community college who was doing raku firing, and he wanted me to save sawdust, specific sawdust to the type of wood. So ebony sawdust, rosewood sawdust, cherry sawdust, walnut sawdust. When I worked with it, he wanted me to use my brush to save him that specific sawdust so that he could identify effects in the pottery from tossing that sawdust into his raku firing. I don't know the final result. He didn't report to me, ebony looks different than this or whatever. But so yeah, you can keep the recycling going to a ridiculous extent. I mean, just an absurd almost extent. Andrew, our son, is a ceramic artist. I save the ashes from my wood stove for him, and he uses the ashes in his wood-fired pots. He introduces ashes. He's gone now, just because I was going to ask him a question. But I don't understand that process exactly, but he does, and he uses my ash from the backyard shop in his wood-fired pots. So that's about as far down the line as you can get with using it. Right.
You have a question on that.
Yes,
Dan Saul is asking you a question.
Dan, okay.
Oh.
He's asking, do you relate to Michelangelo when he says that the sculptor is already in marble? This passage is always
No, that's absurd.
First of all, Dan, you did a fantastic job for us, and I'm so happy with the results, and we had so many wonderful praising responses last night. I just want to tell you, thank you. I've made a lot of spoons. I've made a couple thousand spoons in my life, so I have absolutely had that experience in the course of making some pieces. I've described a fair amount about my process to you already, but so it's certainly not always, but I have, because it's the suggestion of that question sort of is that there's one spoon inside the piece, and I don't feel that way. I feel like, if all of you were spoon makers and you all had the same piece of wood and you all could go in a little space where you couldn't see each other and you made a spoon, you wouldn't make the same piece. I don't feel like there's just one potential good piece in there. I feel like it's as many pieces in there as there are minds or imaginations in there. So, but I have had that feeling some of the time while making a piece that I am liberating a piece that I see in there, or that is in there. I don't know how to split that out, but yeah, I've had that feeling several times. But detail of a finished piece because some of my pieces, some of my larger pieces take days, even a couple weeks to make. And the really fine detail that's on many of these pieces, just you go to bed at night and you think you're kind of done, and you come back in the next day and you look at the piece fresh and new again, and you see opportunity that I didn't see the previous night. And I don't draw on paper. I don't plan a piece out totally. I don't know fully what it's going to look like when I'm finished. I have an early idea, and then it kind of evolves in the middle and so forth. So even right to the end, I can add detail because of how I feel real close to the point of oiling it. When I'm almost done, I've changed. You know, there's a little detail on the end of the handles of the black piece that was added very late, really late. I saw that. It just, I don't know how to explain that process, but it must be there when I have the idea. When the idea is clear, then I have to do it. But I didn't see that till right at the end, right near the end.
How do you know when a spoon is done? You walk in and like see the spoon and thought to yourself, oh wow, there's still more detail. Or like when it's done, is it done?
Well, I was thinking of your, Craig he'll say something, I'll add to it or something.
No, it's okay. I'll just talk. I carved some early spoons. I told him he was my spoon carving mentor, and I came up and I showed him some spoons in his booth at ACC Baltimore, and I said, how do you know when a spoon is done? And he took my spoon and he tapped me gently on the head, and he said, it's not up here. And then he tapped me right over my heart and he said, it's down here, handed me the spoon back. And I said, what? You know, like, huh? But it's not an intellectual thing. It's a visceral kind of feeling, and almost spiritual. It's not, I was thinking of it as an engineer, you know, is it the tolerances right? Is the finish right? And it's not about that. It's a feeling about this. You know?
It is. Like I was saying a little bit ago, that I reach a point toward the end where I'm impatient to be done, because I know I'm really close. So I'm wanting to be done, but I'm not. And it suggests the presence of another party in the transaction. You know, I'm waiting to hear from my ally, from my muse or whatever. I'm waiting to hear the little voice in my head that says, you can stop now. It's okay. Yeah.
Actually, I have
4
4 questions.
questions.
So is what the two of you just described, would it be too esoteric to call that lucid dreaming?
Yes.
I'm really familiar.
You didn't ask me to define that.
No, I'm familiar with it. I know what you mean. I know what you mean. I don't think I could. It definitely could be the result of lucid dreaming. I don't think I could work while having a lucid dream. I don't think I would be capable of you know, walking out to the shop and sitting down and retaining the dreaming state, that state of lucid dreaming. I don't think. I have very strong moments or instances. They're really very fast. Instance of inspiration, a really great idea comes over you like a wave, you know, just like clobbers you. At that, but I wouldn't call that a lucid dream. A dream is more like a story or a short. It doesn't have to be a long story, but it's a little bit of a process thing from point A to point B.
I was just looking at it conceptually from any emerging awareness of something that doesn't or didn't represent the items that we see before us now. it's a movement, thought of energy,
Mhm.
staying in touch with that. To allow that to come out in the way that it does. You know, this isn't really anything, you can do the same process in creative writing, for example.
Sure,
You know.
totally.
So we have that same faculty, that intellectual faculty that enables us to do that.
Yeah, I think anyone can access the same thing I'm talking about. I think people do all the time, and different cultures have different names for it. Different religions often have names for that experience. There's drug
Music is
experiences.
another example.
What?
Music.
Music. Oh my gosh. Yes.
So if
Right.
you look at, you know, a lot of people attribute Bob Dylan's success as an example
Uh-huh.
to his ability to stay consciously aware most of the time. You know, that's where it's.
Well, actually, Dylan's concept of creativity I've seen described as, or him talking about it as if there's like it's very tied into my Spoon Dreams series of pieces. I've done 5 or 6 attempts to carve my concept of creativity, to represent my concept of creativity in a sculpture. And Dylan described like a river flowing by, and you're at the river or you're next to it, and the river's just got all the songs, all the notes, all the instruments, everything related to sound is coming right by, and he can pull something out. He can grab something. He can incorporate something for his song, his next song, in the totality of all songs, all that it ever was, all that was in the past, all the way to the future. It's all right there going by you. And
Drugs help a lot too.
Yeah. So, okay, so does your concept of trying to extrapolate your concept of reality conflict with what it is, the message that you're getting from the piece of wood that you're working on? Because I'm hearing that the spoon stirs the soul of the wood, not necessarily the person that purchases it.
Yeah.
You know, there's two things going on here. There's the wood, and then there's your definition, your interpretation.
well, but that's like my measure of success is when my experience of making a piece and the energy I bring to the piece, the energy that the wood brings to the piece. So I take that finished piece to a show, and hundreds of people over the course of 4 days come into my booth. Just a very small number, maybe 10 people, eight people, 6 people in the course of the show will connect with the experience I had making the piece. It's not articulated. It's not something, I'm not saying never, but often it's just they're drawn to a piece. They connect with that piece. They want to have the piece around them all the time, and they buy the piece. So they haven't heard my experience, but I think yes, it hits them to the extent that they want it around all the time, so they buy it. And I feel that those people have validated the experience I had making it by having that connection. Yes, Michael.
Here are the other 3 questions.
Well, there's a hand raised literally next to you. So yes, in a second, but right.
Well, this is a thought that I had. You might totally disagree with it. You know, good to know.
Uh-huh.
If I look at the things that I first saw, what I don't know when it was.
It was at Rhinebeck,
I know that.
83. I mean, 83, 82, 83.
I would say that work is nothing like the work now. They're 2 different things totally. One of them was more about making spoons.
Mhm.
And I would have called it a spoon maker. Now, I don't call you that. I call you a wood sculptor who specializes in spoons. Images of spoons. And somewhere along the line, it's also a period that I didn't see. There's a gap, I don't know how many years. That went from that style to much softer style, no hard edges, no, not any detail like this. Like some of the pieces here, you know, to describe. And then I saw it again, and I said, wow, it's different. It's very different, something happened. And I don't know what it was, because there was that gap, but it was so different. The first stuff you made reminded me more, I think, of some friend of yours who lived in upstate New York. It was a spoon maker. It was all functional spoons.
Uh-huh.
Gordon something?
Barry Gordon.
I thought of it more as on that continuum,
Uh-huh.
more sophisticated. Then there was this lapse, and then it was totally different. It was like we've been born.
Well, I mean, it was being born again by fractions over years, because in the 80s, even a couple times in the 70s, I made pieces that are of this period, that are like now, but only made, if I made 60 spoons that year, I only made 2 of those ones like you're talking about, where you would relate to them as sculpture. And the number of pieces that were like that gradually increased until it dawned on me what I mean, I didn't see it. I didn't really realize it. I just thought that was one of my best spoons, but I didn't really
I think the next time you do
analyze it.
show some of the early stuff.
There are a few, very few early ones right over behind, right against the wall there.
Guardian is a good example. That was 1980,
1,
81.
2,
It's
something like
right
that.
over there, and it's very early, and it is not spoonish.
No, it's not.
It's not a spoon, that's for sure. It's a very abstract sculpture.
So this is kind of a technical question. After that. So in the beginning, when you were kind of doing the quote unquote more functional spoons or whatever, then was there a point where you know, where we talked about it often, where you could see where it almost like you changed the attachment, like a handle, and it looked like they were 2 pieces.
Uh-huh.
And so, you know, did you always make a spoon, you know, I mean, spoons are like 1 piece of whatever, but you changed the way you're, you know, it just looks like you almost have 2 pieces on that, you know, that you attached on it. And so you changed the way you actually made that handle or whatever. And like, how long did it take for that to come out of you?
It's actually a complex answer, because I've really put a lot of time in, I still do, in learning about how other people make spoons and what they make. And I'm attracted to people who don't make the same piece over and over again. There are a few other woodworkers. One was here last night who make spectacular art spoons out of wood. And I follow them and I pay attention to what they do. And my time studying other cultures, I see that, you know, there's certain places on a spoon that are possible to vary. The lip of the spoon doesn't have to be like a hard line. It can be rounded. It can be only rounded on the inside. It can only be rounded on the outside. It can be notched. There's like a whole list of things that can be done to embellish or use the rim in different ways to enhance the design of the whole piece. That's true where the handle joins the bowl. That's true for the shape of the handle, how it fits your hand. That's true of the depth of the bowl. Shallow spoon is one thing, a medium, you know, so on down to ridiculous. You know, you can make a statement of sorts with a gigantic fat bowl and almost no handle at all. There's a piece in here called Pink Bullfrog that's all bowl. It just has this little thing at the end that's a handle. And it did look like a bullfrog about to croak, you know, that giant thing out front blown up. So I'm obsessed with spoons. I look at other people's spoons, other culture spoons. I see spoons and things. I get teased about it all the time. We'll go to a museum and in someone else's sculpture, my eye picks out some little piece of it, not the whole thing. I don't say the whole thing looks like a spoon, but within the piece will be a suggestion of a spoon form. The Wharton Esherick Museum did a show called Poplar Culture several years ago where they cut down a poplar tree that was right next to the museum. They were afraid it was going to hurt the museum. And they gave pieces of it to woodworkers all over the place to do something with. And so I got a book of Esherick's work, his sculpture, his furniture, and I found spoons in his pieces. And then using his wood, I tried to show his inspiration for my work. And I did 3 pieces and entered into that event, the Poplar Culture Show. You know, Diana and I go to museums all the time, and I'll take pictures of just a piece of some sculpture. And then, because there is a spoon in there, or maybe more than one. So, yeah.
I've got another question from Derek. He's asking, after so many years of doing wonderful forms, how do you keep creating fresh designs?
Your psychologist.
Craig just said that I have a degree in psychology, so I should be able to do this. It's something that I just trust now. It's not a conscious effort. I'm not, or even a technique. I guess it is a technique, so I suppose, because, but I'm not, it's not a conscious step-by-step thing in my brain. It's the wood first, usually, not 100%. And then it's grows from something I see, that initial thing. And it also sometimes comes from the opposite, because I've been given wood that had the reason the other person hadn't used it is because it had some very obvious flaws, some things that just would cancel its use for a lot of people. So rather than just leaving those bad things on the piece, I'll go to the bandsaw usually and bandsaw the worst parts off with no design in mind at all. I'm taking parts that can't be in my piece because they're rotten or they're bark or something, like, you know, big cracks that I don't see any use for. And it's an accidental way of stumbling on a spoon design, because in removing all the impossible pieces, I sometimes reveal a potential form, because, you know, it would be an irregular shape already, but then I'm making it ridiculously irregular, chopping out all these bad pieces, and then checking to see if there's potential in the final piece. So that's one thing, Derek, that I do. Actually, I do it on almost every piece has something wrong at the beginning, and I get rid of that right at the beginning, and that sometimes affects the design.
And Norm has, in the book, I describe a deep well of probably unconscious elements that he's picked up over the years through sensitivity to natural curves, shapes, 3D forms, natural things in the environment, living forms, plants and animals. They're all in there stewing around, and he combines them. There's an infinite number of possible combinations. They're combined synergistically and interact with one another. They can be stretched, distorted, and moved around. So there's a lot of design elements, you know, creativity doesn't come from nothing. It comes from everything. And so he's got really a very vast repository of design ideas in his mind because of his sensitivity to the natural world primarily, but also to human-made built environment and everything else. But those create all kinds of possibilities in a creative imagination. These are the atoms, the building blocks, the elements that you can put together to construct something. And we see those bubble up sometimes. I think it's a mistake to think that if artist says, if you can identify my source, then I didn't create it. And that's not true. Because, you know, everything comes from something. And there's nothing absolutely new in the world, sorry. So, but he has a very vast reservoir of elements with which to work and an infinite number of possible combinations to go still.
Yeah, I don't think there's any end. There's no limit, and that's not just true for me, that's true for anybody. One of the joys of continuing to be curious about other people's work is the fact that a different person with different experiences, a different well, as you put it, produces a different result. Surprise, surprise. And that's just great. I mean, I wish David Ellsworth told me a long time ago that he thought I would do better if it was competition, if there were other people coming to shows making art spoons. And there weren't, but there certainly could be, and I would like to encourage that. I hope that when I stop, that other people will further explore what's possible to do with spoons. I don't want it to stop, so.
Norm, did you have a visceral reaction when you walked into the gallery and was reunited with all these forms from over so many years?
Sort of joyous weeping. Yes, Diane and I talked about that. We really, in 120 pieces, a lot of this work we hadn't seen for a long time. It had been in the home of the person who bought it, in some cases for more than 30 years. Hadn't seen it. Some 20, you know, on down, but some were a little smaller than we imagined. Some were a little bigger than we remembered. We remember everything. I remember all these pieces. I remember making all these pieces, but and I was delighted that they're all in pretty good shape still. Everybody, they've all held up, and the cat hadn't gotten a hold of it, or the dog or something, you know. I was delighted to see that they're all in good shape. Yes, it's like gathering the family around. It was amazing. It still is amazing. I'm sitting here looking at different pieces behind you all. I can see. Maybe we won't leave Philadelphia. You know, maybe we'll just stay in here for the 3 months. So it was wonderful.
How have you protected yourself from the often toxic effects of all these exotic woods that you use, and the methods by which to get them shaped up the way they are?
I don't have a very good answer, San. Genetics. You know, I'm 75, and so far I haven't had much bad response. I do, not as much as a lot of people. A lot of people have better dust systems. You know, I try to keep the worst of the dust off of me or away from me, and I have had a series of power helmets with filtration for the very worst of it. But the very worst is when you can't really see that clearly in the shop. That's what I call the very worst. So sometimes I'm working with a level of dust that I don't see as objectionable, that I'm sure it's very fine in the air, that I'm still getting some. So there are a couple woods that I have found I can't work with at all. East Indian rosewood, for example, which is what Martin replaced Brazilian rosewood for their guitar backs and sides with East Indian, and I can't be in the room with it. I can be in the room with the plain piece of wood, but
Guitar.
if there's any cutting going on or dust sanding, then it constricts, it shuts me down, and I have to go outside really quick. So I would give it away if somebody wants some East Indian. I can't use it. And sassafras, of all the dumb things, who's ever heard of any? That's not in the literature. Nobody reacts to sassafras, but I do. I can't work with that either. So it's not that great. So it's not a problem. But I would like to work with East Indian.
So one, I want to make a closing comment before we finish, and that is one thing I learned about, I feel I learned anyway for me personally, is now I look at art and wood completely differently, having spent 3 years working with Norm on the book and this exhibit. And I now see the goal of what elevates a piece of art in wood to the level of art, that it really just kind of rises off the ground and lifts up and transcends to a level of art, is a perfect integration of the form and the material and the wood. And I think, for example, for me, the reason these 5 are here, these exemplify 5 different aspects of his work to me. But this one, Orionid, is, to me, it's art, and it just lifts, it doesn't need Mark Manson's stand. It could float by itself because it's transcendent piece that integrates the quality of the wood, the tone, the grain, and the form. Now, we've all seen art in wood where people, the very first reaction they have is, look at that wood. And to me, now that is the most biting, deepest cutting criticism I could ever get if I show somebody art of wood I made, because that means the form didn't integrate with the wood in a way. And I see these pieces as I walk around and in the permanent collection at the center, looking for this feeling I get of this is perfectly balanced between the form and the wood. And the form and the wood are integrated into a whole that creates this art. And it's not just pretty wood. Anybody can get pretty wood with pretty color, cool grain, polish it up and say, there, I made that. You didn't make that, nature made that. Look at the wood, that's great. And you put a pretty mediocre form on a beautiful piece of wood, you know? And you can do other things. You can take plastic material or concrete or anything and make a great form out of it. Look at larger architecture and buildings. And there's no real aspect to the grain or color the way there is with wood. But wood has the potential to integrate this perfect balance between those two, where nobody says, look, or as many people say, look at that form of that piece, Orionid, as say, look at that wood. And many times people will look and you can't break them apart. You can't separate those two. And so that's really changed the way I look at all the great pieces we have in the permanent collection now. I look for that feeling of integrating form and material. And Norm hits it out of the park time after time after time with that.
Do you think that Nakashima had an influence in helping you define what you just talked about?
I went to his place one time, to George Nakashima's studio and home, and I wanted to meet him. And he was still alive. He was walking with a cane, and I had been to a show, and I had all my pieces for the show. This is before the spoon booth. I had knife racks and other things and spoons. And I found him and told him that I introduced myself. I said, I would love to show you my work, some of my work. He was very polite. He came out to the parking lot. I got a couple pieces out of the back of my van or my truck, I think then. And I just think he was polite. I don't think that, I don't remember any comment as being especially affecting me. But being at his compound affected me. And especially being in the building where he kept his slabs, his stash of wood affected me. Not that I ever wanted to make giant things like some of the things he did. But his philosophy about the soul of the tree and each piece having one best use, I don't necessarily subscribe to that. I think the piece would have other uses, but I admired his stash of wood so much. And then a little later, I got to go to the sawmill where he would buy enormous logs, have logs brought to this particular mill that was run by the Martin Guitar Company, a giant bandsaw mill, and they would cut his giant slabs there, and I got to see all that. So I have a tremendous admiration for his finished product, for his career. His work has remained in front of the public. It still is being made by his daughter, and he's a great man in the field. Absolutely. Have a little different philosophical approach, but admire him tremendously. Yeah.
But James Krenoff was a much bigger influence on Norm than Nockershin. Much, much, much more, by a factor of 100. Krenoff, this is really, Norm met his spiritual guru in Krenoff, and he met him early.
Well, I read the Guru's book.
And it changed. It changed a lot. So meeting Nakashima did not have that effect. And I had to learn a lot about Krenoff, and I didn't know, but
all those
this
people,
connection was really powerful for
seeing that all these were individuals. These are all individuals. All the names were individuals. Wharton Esherick had a couple people who worked with him all the time and helped him make his ideas, or in some cases actually made his idea. But they were all individual working artists that made us think really that a life in the arts was possible. The object makers. I took classes from a lot of early in my career from people. There was a craft school 40 miles south of where I lived in Ripley, West Virginia, run by the state of West Virginia. And the person who ran the workshops there brought in David Ellsworth and John Jordan and Del Stubbs and many people, many names that many people here would know. And I would take their workshop because I wanted to spend time with another woodworker who made objects, not because most of them were turning workshops. And I've always had a problem with turning because it makes almost everything round. And I wasn't attracted to symmetry. I liked learning about tool use and learning from people who had careers making objects in woodworking. So I wanted to be in their space for a weekend or a week to talk to them, to get to know them, to see if I could learn anything about having a career in making objects, more than can I learn to turn a potato chip thin thing like that from Del Stubbs. When I took Del's class, he had just been to Lapland and worked with Willie Sundquist, and I was lucky because he just happened to be all full of spoons when he came back from that trip, and he came back to teach at Cedar Lakes. It just was a timing thing. So it was super to be around him at that particular time. He had spoons on his brain right then. And He's one of the greatest turners. He's had no interest in fame or fortune, the absence of personal ambition. His ambition was the technique and the skill and how far can he push it, and how he was just the most awesome turner I ever saw. I think he could make what everyone else made. Give him a few days, he could make what anyone in the field. I was never so impressed with anybody. But I had him in the spoon week when he had spoons on his mind. And I took a lot of those classes just to be around somebody. So. Did you make it to 4?
I did have one last question. Okay, so if you were to send your works that were made in West Virginia or Pennsylvania or on the East Coast to an arid environment like where I live, how do you keep how do you stabilize the wood? Because I don't know about you, but I've had checking and cracking, all kinds of issues, related to our changing planet.
Right.
None of this stuff looks like it's been affected that way. I'm just curious.
That's another, it's part of the answer that I didn't mention. It was good to see that pretty much everything, I haven't had them in my hands to inspect them, but I couldn't see where there were any cracks or damaged places on these pieces. They all look pretty good. So dimension is a factor in that. Dryness, when I was working it, not when you have it, or when anyone has it, but the dryness that at the time I'm working it, before I put any finish on it, is a factor. And then the finish I use is a penetrating oil finish first. And the very last thing is a wax coat, and I use Johnson's paste wax like people put on their floors, which is not a high carnauba content wax. It doesn't require power buffing. Can just buff it with a t-shirt or something, or a paper towel. So it seems to work. It fills the pores with the oil finish. I don't use hardly any open grain woods. I use almost all closed grain woods. So they have a very tight closed grain.
And dense hardwood.
Right, but those are tricky to dry. Yes, I do use dense hardwoods, but I've had them for a long time. I've had woods that I use woods that are very dry, and people have, I think, more of a factor than what you're saying with the arid environment is the heating and cooling cycle in people's homes. Most people have central heat and cooling in America. And that cycle is tough on wood furniture, built-in wood. Find a good finished carpenter who's installed some sort of built-in, and objects. So some of the sculptures, Guardian over there is walnut, which dries pretty easily. It's not a difficult wood to dry. That has a crack in it. That's ours. We own that. But evidently, I moved a little too fast on that piece.
Some woods
got
are
ahead of
really
it.
Unstable, right? Like holly really deforms a lot as it dries.
The worst in the wood world is Suriname snakewood, and it comes to you after having been. It comes to you in a little log in the round. Maybe between 4 and 6 inches in diameter. All the sapwood has been chopped off in the jungle because they think it's of no interest. And the logs are shipped that way, about 4 feet long, dipped in wax. The whole piece is dipped in wax, coated with wax. And it is the worst of all time. It is so far in the lead as the worst wood. It's remarkable. So you have to reduce the dimensions. It's very hard to have a large piece out of snakewood, tremendously challenging to make anything big. So if I'm making a spoon, which is relatively small out of snake wood, I put it in a plastic bag when I go into the house to have lunch. If I have not finished, I go in for the night, I come back the next day. That night, I reduce the environment with a plastic bag, or you could use wrap of some sort. I change it from the whole room, the moisture content of the room, to the moisture content of the air in the bag. Really tiny environment. So it doesn't change overnight, because snake wood is like the canary in the coal mine. It will crack ahead of everything else, before anything. You can't just store a piece. If I have a piece that I'm not using for a year, I have a piece in my shop now, I coat it in wax. You just can't make that wood survive. It will blow apart overnight. Now, once you finish it, I make small pieces, and they're not, the thickest area on a piece might be 3/4 of an inch on anywhere on the piece. If
I think it's time for us to wrap up according to the boss. Is that true?
Yeah. Well, I'll be here for several days, so.
We'll be here for 3 months. Really.
Sure.
What was the most special thing or moment that occurred while you were planning this exhibition together?
One moment that I'm going to remember for the rest of my life is when I said I thought I wanted 5 featured pieces that showed how far Norm got in his quest to find the spoon as an object of art. And he said, well, what 5 pieces? And I named them from memory. I know all these pieces. I hadn't seen them before, just the photographs. And I said, well, Apex, Orionid, this great ebony spoon from a Forgotten Ceremony, Retusa Gallery offering, and I was waiting for the reply. And Norm said on the phone, he said, yeah, those sound really good. And I was like, because we haven't always agreed in the last few years about other aspects of everything about Norm's life, his work, his art, his career. And I just felt overwhelmingly validated. I just was like, oh my gosh, I get like some sort of badge for this.
For me, is this in a moment or a particular event? I think sometime in this talk, we mentioned that we did another book before this on a deceased woodworker who affected my career years ago, named Emma Milan. And over the course of working on that book and all the hard work Craig did to help bring that book to exist, and the exhibition that followed the development of the book, I came to really trust him. And actually, you can use differences of opinion to enhance things. I don't think either of us won more often than the other necessarily in the times that we disagreed. I think we, for the most part, used our disagreements to reach a conclusion on things that were, in the course of a project as vast as these 2 books and as this show, it seems almost too much to ask that there would never be a disagreement. So we had a few things that we disagreed on, but I think we both tried to use that difference of opinion to make it better rather than be nasty to each other or anything like that. So I trust him, and I believe that he wanted the same thing I wanted, to have a beautiful book, to have a strong show. And I mean, that was the bottom line for me and why I still talk to him on Wednesdays. I mean, really, I enjoyed working with you and think we succeeded. I really
Yes,
think we
I think so.
succeeded. So.
So,